3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of baseball. So when it comes to the origins of America's pastime, in 1845, the first baseball club formed in New York City, known as the New York Knickerbocker Baseball Club. This club would create many of the rules of the modern game today. This club would create many of the rules of the game which remain in place today, and it would eventually lead to the first ever baseball game between the Knickerbockers and the New York Nines in 1846. Then as the game became more popular, like with all sports, professional teams then started to develop. The first being the Cincinnati Red Stockings in 1869, and a few years later, the National Association of Professional Baseball Players would form in 1871, leading to teams being created all across the country. However, in 1876, this league would fold due to the rise of a rival league known as the National League, which would form the same year and eventually become part of what is known as Major League Baseball today. Next, by 1901, another powerful professional league would form called the American League, the other half of Major League Baseball today. And so, for many years, the National League and the American League had this rivalry going on, as both were very developed leagues at the time, and they both sought to compete for the best players. But by 1903, an agreement between the two leagues was formed, where they would then work with each other and also have something called a World Series at the end of their seasons, where the best team of each league would compete against each other to be known as the World Series champion, and this essentially created what is known as Major League Baseball today. Though it also must be pointed out that the two leagues, despite working together for decades, did not actually fully merge officially until the year 2000. So when you're thinking about the history of baseball, probably the next major thing beyond the formation of what Major League Baseball is today was the development in the 20th century where baseball started to be ethnically integrated. Because throughout the 1900s, black players, for example, were not allowed to play in the American or National Leagues of Major League Baseball due to racism and racial segregation throughout American society. Thus, players who were of African descent were forced to play in various Negro leagues. Luckily, though, segregation in baseball would end in 1947 when Jackie Robinson became the first official black player to play in Major League Baseball in the National League for the New York Dodgers. So this basically just gives you kind of a rundown of the founding as well as the racial integration aspect of baseball and how it got to the point where it is today. But one of the biggest questions when it comes to baseball history that many people like to actually debate is who was the greatest player of all time. This is something that people naturally want to debate when it comes to sports history for any sport. So now I want to focus on the big picture when it comes to this question, as well as who's the greatest baseball team ever. So in baseball, many names may come to mind when it comes to the best player ever. Some may say Ty Cobb, or Willie Mays, or Lou Gehrig, or Hank Aaron, or pitchers like Walter Johnson, Pedro Martinez, Cy Young, or Grover Cleveland Alexander. But ultimately, the most common answer is a man named Babe Ruth, who played from 1914 to 1935. Babe Ruth is obviously probably the most famous American athlete in history. He won 7 World Series championships with the New York Yankees. He won an MVP award, and he led the league in runs batted in 5 times. But perhaps his greatest accomplishment was his ability to hit home runs in an era that was known as the dead ball era because home runs were so much less common than it is today. And Babe Ruth was so good that he led Major League Baseball in home runs 11 times, something that no one else has ever come close to doing. And obviously, home runs are the one offensive thing that you can do that will automatically generate a point without having runners on base. And so the ability to have a person that can hit a lot of home runs is probably the best skill an offensive player can have, because it can generate instant points for your team. And if there are people on base when you hit a home run, obviously you get even more points. So it's a critical aspect to any successful team, as long as this player is also someone who doesn't strike out all the time and has a low batting average. But that was not the case for Babe Ruth, who was not only a great hitter, but also arguably the greatest home run hitter of all time, given how dominant he was in his era. And I think that's the main thing that you really have to think about when you're trying to debate players, regardless of sport, across different eras. The game changes a lot over time. So if you want to understand who the greatest ever was in a particular sport, you really have to just look at, how great that person was compared to other players they played against within that era. And the most dominant player from the era that they played in would be considered the best, because you can't have these people playing against each other. It never happens. So really, that seems like the only way to fairly compare historical figures when it comes to their success and who is the best player of all time. Now, when it comes to the best team in baseball history, though many are probably not fans of the New York Yankees, you have to say the New York Yankees, who won 27 championships, with the last being in 2009. Second, in terms of the most World Series championships, is the St. Louis Cardinals, who have a distant 11. So obviously, the New York Yankees have been dominant for decades historically and are the clear frontrunners when it comes to historic success in Major League Baseball, making them the greatest baseball franchise of all time. So now thinking about baseball today and how the game continues to grow globally and change slightly in rules. Perhaps, though, the biggest change that has occurred recently is the rise of international stars, especially out of Japan. In the 2000s, we saw players like Ichiro Suzuki, and obviously currently playing in the modern day game of baseball is another Japanese superstar named Shohei Ohtani, who is well regarded for his ability to be a great pitcher and a great hitter, which is a rarity in baseball. In fact, the last person that excelled at both pitching and hitting was Babe Ruth. So Shohei Ohtani has been getting a lot of attention because of how successful he has been at both, but also his success on the international level when it comes to what is essentially the Baseball World Cup, which began in 2006, known as the World Baseball Classic. When it comes to countries and how successful they have been, Japan has actually won this event 3 times. They have won the World Baseball Classic, becoming the best country in the world at baseball, while the United States and the Dominican Republic have only won it once. Now, it should be noted that not all American star players have been playing in this event historically. For example, in the last World Baseball Classic, just recently, the United States was missing basically all of their best pitchers. So it wasn't something that the U.S. was taking all that seriously, but Japan takes it very seriously and with great pride, much more than the Americans do, which I think also suggests how much baseball has changed regarding the passion for the sport, because Japan has really emerged as kind of the front runner for baseball fandom on the international level, at least. Every single Japanese star played in the last World Baseball Classic that happened, while many Americans skipped it, as I just said. So, and the other big statistic to think about is the fact that way more people in Japan were watching it than Americans did. For example, in the championship game between the U.S. and Japan, 5 million Americans watched it in the US compared to 29 million that watched in Japan. So when you think about those numbers and the difference, baseball may be America's pastime, but today it is on track to become the sport of Japan, at least on the international level. So hopefully in the United States, people will take that a little bit more seriously, given that international competitions are usually considered to be great events for national pride. You look at the World Cup of soccer and how seriously countries take that. You don't hear about people skipping the World Cup. Given the U.S. invented baseball, it'd be kind of like England, who formed the first official soccer governing body, to skip the World Cup because it's just too boring and they would rather just play English Premier League games. It's very strange that the U.S. doesn't take this more seriously, given it is an American-invented game. But hopefully, as Japan has continued to dominate on the international stage, the U.S. will take it more seriously in the future, which will make it much more fun and interesting to have all the best players playing in these international competitions. So with that, just wanted to do a fun episode, kind of changing themes a little bit, as I like to do every so often. And that's the history of baseball. So thanks for listening. And as always, remember, billions of years led to you. So make the most of it.